I featured a lot of great scripts, tricks, and tips this year, and when picking just some of them to highlight, I try to put some of my own personal interests aside. I featured a lot of RPA related tips as an example, but I realized this may not interest everyone, so I went for what I feel might appeal to a wider audience. So first up, I could just have said that there's a tip to follow Jen Gentleman on Twitter. Jen works for Microsoft, and she's just great on all social media platforms at constantly providing really great tips. And just some of the tips that she shared this year include using the Control-Shift-C keyboard shortcut in Windows 11 for copy as path, using a grid view for the clock in Windows to get a world clock, or alternatively also being able to set alternative clocks. So if you're working with teams across various different time zones, this could be really amazing for you to very quickly see, oh, okay, this is what time it is where this person's working. Maybe I'll hold off on sending them this message on Teams or Slack or whatever. Another tip was to use PowerToys to batch rename files. And a couple of other keyboard shortcuts. If you use Control, Shift, and T, you're able to reopen a tab in Edge if you accidentally closed one. And finally, use Win, Shift, and Left and Right to move a window between monitors. But yeah, like I said, if you just want to follow Jen on Twitter, that's @JenMSFT. Another cool tip that was shared this year, Dark Coder on GitHub shared a Power Run as System PowerShell module created for executing applications and processes in Windows in the system context without a need for any other tools such as PSExec. Hacking Articles shared a really nice looking and simple infographic this year for authentication security. A really nice one to maybe print out and stick up on your, hopefully, home cubicle wall or just the wall in your office, just for a referral, or also maybe share it with your team. It's a pretty good one. And also kind of in the security realm, I think the next few tips I picked were from a security perspective. But Pingcastle have a really cool tool for performing quick Active Directory security audits. And if you're listening to the audio-only version of the podcast, there is a YouTube edition that you can check out. You'll find it at 5bytespodcast.com. But on the YouTube edition, you'll be able to see an example of what the report generated for the Active Directory security audit looks like. It's pretty impressive looking. This year, there was also a tip to check out an Azure AD assessment script, which is on GitHub, and I'll share a link to that with this episode, which is episode 263, and you'll find that at 5bytespodcast.com, and you'll find a link to absolutely everything I reference on every episode of the podcast over at 5bytespodcast.com. But another really great security tip, and one I've repeated on several episodes this year, is to join the patching mail group. So there's a Google mail group that's completely dedicated to patching. So a lot of the stories that I'll cover on the show, I'll initially see the reports coming through that mail group, and then I'll typically kind of wait until some of the other media outlets start to report it and maybe get some confirmation from Microsoft. But this is a really great first port of call, and if you're an IT administrator who does patching, you should really be in this group to get information as quickly as possible about patches when they go wrong. Also security related, Sophos had a great post this year on reconstructing PowerShell scripts from multiple Windows event logs. So if an attacker uses a PowerShell script, you're actually able to piece that script back together via the Windows event logs. And Trevor Jones this year shared a script to get the current Windows 10 patch level using PowerShell. And not security related for this one, but kind of from a personal standpoint, I had a really great time presenting at HIMSS, which is a medical conference in Orlando, Florida, with my good friend Trenton Ty during the year. And after the conference, we published a blog post on ControlUp.com using actual real-world data showing remote access tool utilization in different countries and how that may correlate with public health policies during the peak of the pandemic. So really, really interesting to see that data and to kind of compare it country to country. Like, for example, Australia had a pretty kind of rigid isolation policy, and they kept things open, and you can kind of see that most people didn't get forced to work remotely, so remote access kind of happened later in the flow for them versus maybe someone like Ireland, where I am, where things hit very early on, and you can kind of see that in how people were working. And I couldn't have a best of without mentioning some of Guy Leach's tips. And Guy this year shared a commandlet to find all Azure related modules and install them. Guy also shared a script for trimming working memory sets, which is a really interesting one, particularly if you're on maybe published desktops, terminal services for published applications as well. If you want to free up some memory from maybe idle sessions or something like that, you can clear a lot of memory by running this script. Also PowerShell related, but Brian Posse had shared a blog on how to create functions in PowerShell scripts. So kind of going back to basics, but also very important. The Austin Morris Daily shared his resources this year on Application Reliability Monitor with Log Analytics. And some of the work that Morris has done with Log Analytics is very, very impressive. So if that's something you're interested in, check out this blog. Thomas Thornton had a post on writing reusable Terraform modules, and Terraform has been very, very popular in the recent years. And kind of maybe also related, but not directly, Sid Palace had a really great Terraform course that he created and shared, and it's available completely for free on YouTube. It is a complete Terraform course, so if you're interested in getting started with Terraform, definitely check that out. I completed it myself. And someone in the same vein, the awesome Jim Moyle had a series of YouTube videos from a couple years ago, but I shared them again on the podcast this year, where he's going through Azure Image Builder. I think he goes through ARM templates and several different automation techniques for Azure Virtual Desktop and really just virtual machines in Azure in general. And the awesome James Kindon had a blog post this year on shrinking an Azure OS disk to enable ephemeral capabilities. So one of the tricks with the ephemeral OS disk is there has to be a certain size allowance, I believe, for the caching of the OS disk. So it's kind of a difficult one to get started with because you need to size things right, and you might think you're picking a disk that will work for it, but because there's so much disk required for the caching, it's not a good fit, and then you just have the option grayed out. So James can kind of help you through that with this blog post. And on the Windows 365 side of things, there's some Windows 365 PowerShell scripts shared this year, including a script to enable ShortPath for cloud PCs. I also personally shared my own automated build using robotic process automation that I run every month for building out a brand new fully patched Windows 365 custom image. Mike Streets took part in a webinar this year, and the video recording of that is still available on YouTube, where he shared his top 10 Citrix optimizations. And one I mention I think pretty much every year, but there's a really great example of a toast notification, this time to notify users when recycle bin contains more than 10 gigabytes or more, and in this particular instance it's being executed via Intune or MECM, but it's a pretty cool script to just kind of integrate into your own processes however you see fit. Toast notifications are awesome. And Leo Buquet had a blog post on how to build a private Winget repository. So if you want to use Windows Package Manager and have your own source for your packages, this is one to check out. Michael Hildebrand had a blog covering the topic of Azure Active Directory join and whether to use it or not. And kind of in that vein, Brooks Pepin had a post on 10 things to know about hybrid Azure Active Directory join with Intune. So hybrid Azure Active Directory and Azure Active Directory join have been big topics this year. And finally, a short one but still a good one, Joshua Gatewood shared a PowerShell commandlet that you can use to force Azure Active Directory dynamic groups to recalculate. Now I'm not sure if that one's still going to be relevant if you're using the latest Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync, I think it's called, I covered on the last episode of the podcast. But hopefully so. If not, if you're still on Azure AD Connect, I'm sure this works. But that's it for this episode. Normal service will resume next week. Thank you all so much for listening, and Happy New Year.